Hello YouTube, welcome to the video. This is going to be chapters 1, 2, and 3 of the Artemis Fowl book. It's going to be the scary reading. I should see it now. This one. If you like this content, I do stream over on twitch.tv/JanIsLaw. Majority of my videos will get edited and posted here on YouTube. So if you enjoy my content, please give a subscribe and a like, and maybe even press the bell button. That'd be pretty neat. But yeah, thank you and enjoy the video. Alright. I've read this book like multiple times and it's all like worn out and everything. But I haven't actually read it in a really long time, so. Alright, we'll start with the prologue. How does one describe Artemis Fowl? Various psychiatrists have tried and failed. The main problem is Artemis's own intelligence. He bamboozles every test thrown at him. He has puzzled the greatest medical minds and sent many of them gibbering to their own hospitals. There is no doubt that Artemis is a child prodigy, but why does someone of such brilliance dedicate himself to criminal activities? This is a question that can be answered by only one person, and he delights in not talking. Perhaps the best way to create an accurate picture of Artemis is to tell the by now famous account of his villainous venture. Perhaps the best way to create an accurate picture of Artemis is to tell the by now famous account of his villainous venture. I've put together this report from first-hand interviews with the victims. As the tale unfolds, you will realize that this is not easy. The story began several years ago at the dawn of the 21st century. Artemis Fowl had devised a plan to restore his family's fortune, a plan that could topple civilizations and plunge planets into a cross-species war. He was 12 years old at the time. Ho Chi Minh City in the summer, sweltering by anyone's standards. Needless to say, Artemis Fowl would not have been willing to put up with such discomfort if something extremely important had not been at stake. Important to the plan. Sun did not suit Artemis. He did not look well in it. Long hours indoors in front of a computer screen had bleached the glow from his skin. He was white as a vampire and almost as testy in the light of day. I hope this isn't another wild goose chase, Butler, he said, his voice soft and clipped, especially after Cairo. In a gentle rebuke, they had traveled to Egypt on the word of Butler's informant. No, sir, I'm certain this time. When is a good man? Droned Artemis, unconvinced. Passerbys would have been amazed to hear the large Eurasian man refer to the boy as sir. This was, after all, the third millennium. But this was no ordinary relationship, and these were no ordinary tourists. They were sitting outside a curbside cafe on Dong Kai Street, watching the local teenagers circle the square on mopeds. Wind was late, and the pathetic patch of shade provided by the umbrella was doing little to improve Artemis's mood. But this was just his daily pessimism. Beneath the sulk was a spark of hope. Could this trip actually yield results? Would they find the book? It was too much to hope for. A waiter scurried to their table. "More tea, sirs?" he asked, head bobbing furiously. Artemis sighed. "Spare me the theatrics and sit down." The waiter turned instinctively to Butler, who was, after all, the adult. "But, sir, I'm the waiter." Artemis tapped the table for attention. "You are wearing handmade loafers, a silk shirt, and 3 gold signet rings. Your English has a tinge of Oxford about it, and your nails have the soft sheen of the recent manicure. You are not a waiter. You are a contact, Win Wan. I'm assuming it has an X. Wan, and you have adopted this pathetic disguise to discreetly check for weaponry." Win's shoulders sagged. "It is true. Amazing." "Hardly. A ragged apron does not a waiter make." Wynne sat, pouring some mint tea into a tiny china cup. Let me fill you in on the weapon status, continued Artemis. I am unarmed. Butler here, my, butler, has a sour? I'm bad at pronunciation. In his shoulder holster. Two shrike-throwing knives in his boots, a derringer to shot up his sleeve, a garrote wire in his watch, and 3 stun grenades concealed in various pockets. Anything else, Butler? The Kosh, sir. Oh, yes, a gold old bearing Kosh stuffed down his shirt. Wynne brought the cup trembling to his lips. Don't be alarmed, Mr. Wan. Artemis smiled. The weapon will not be used on you. Wynne did not seem reassured. No, continued Artemis. Butler could kill you 100 different ways without the use of his weapons, though I'm sure one would be quite sufficient. Wynne was now thoroughly spooked. Artemis had that effect on people, a pale adolescent speaking with the authority and vocabulary of a powerful adult. Wynne had heard the name Fowl before. Who hadn't in the international underworld? But he'd assumed he'd be dealing with Artemis's senior, not the boy. Though the word boy hardly seemed to do this gaunt individual justice, and the giant butler, it was obvious that he could snap a man's backbone, like a twig with those mammoth hands. Wynne was starting to think that no amount of money was worth another minute in this strange company. And now, to the business. Artemis placed a micro recorder on the table. You answered our web advertisement. Wynne nodded, suddenly praying that his information was accurate. Yes, Mr. Master Fowl. What you're looking for, I know where it is. Really, and I'm supposed to take your word for this. You could be walking me straight into an ambush. My family is not without enemies. Butler snatched a mosquito out of the air beside his employer's ear. No, said Wynne, reaching for his wallet. Here, look. Artemis studied the Polaroid. He willed his heart to maintain a calm beat. It seemed promising, but anything could be faked these days, with a PC and a flatbed scanner. The picture showed a hand reaching from layered shadows, a mottled green hand. He murmured. Explain. This woman, she is a healer, near Tudor Street. She works in exchange for rice wine, all the time, drunk. Artemis nodded. It made sense, the drinking, one of the few consistent facts his research had unearthed. He stood pulling the crease from his white polo's shirt. Very well. Lead on, Master Wan. Wynne wiped the sweat from his stringy mustache. Information only. That was the agreement. I don't want any curses on my head. Butler expertly gripped the informant behind the neck. I'm sorry, Mr. Wan, but the time when you had a choice in matters is long past. Butler steered the protesting Vietnamese man to the rented 4-wheel drive. It was hardly necessary on the flat streets of Ho Chi Minh City, or Saigon, as the locals called it, but Artemis preferred to be as insulated from civilians as possible. The Jeep inched forward at a painfully slow rate, made all the more excruciating by the anticipation building in Artemis's chest. He could suppress it no longer. Could they at last be at the end of their quest? After 6 false alarms across 3 continents, could this wine-sodden healer be the gold at the end of the rainbow? Artemis almost chuckled. Gold at the end of the rainbow. He'd made a joke. Now there's something that didn't happen every day. The mopeds parted like fish in a giant shoal. There seemed to be no end to the crowds. Even the alleys were full of reading is hard. Were full to bursting with vendors and hagglers. Cooks dropped fish heads into walks of hissing oil, and urchins threaded their way underfoot, searching for unguarded valuables. Others sat in the shade, wearing out their thumbs on Game Boys. Wynne was sweating right through his khaki top. It wasn't the humidity. He was used to that. It was this whole cursed situation. He should have known better than to mix magic and crime. He made a silent promise that if he got out of this, he would change his ways. No more answering shady internet requests, and certainly no more consorting with the sons of European crime lords. The Jeep could only go so far. Eventually, the side street grew too narrow for the four-wheel drive. Artemis turned to Wynne. "It seems we must proceed on foot, Mr. Wan. Run if you like, but expect a sharp and fatal pain between your shoulder blades." Wynne glanced at Butler's eyes. They were a deep blue, almost black. There was no mercy in those eyes. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't run." They climbed down from the vehicle. 1,000 suspicious eyes followed their progress along the steaming alley. An unfortunate pickpocket attempt to steal Butler's wallet. The manservant broke the man's fingers without looking down. They were given a wide berth after that. The alley narrowed to a rutted lane. Sewage and drain pipes fed directly onto the muddy surface. Cripples and beggars huddled on rice mat islands. Most of the residents of this lane had nothing to spare, with the exception of 3. "Well?" demanded Artemis. "Where is she?" Wynne jabbed a finger towards the black triangle beneath a rusted fire escape. "There, under there. She never comes out, even to buy rice spirits. She sends a runner. Now can I go?" Artemis didn't bother answering. Instead, he picked his way across the puddled lane to the lee of fire escape. He could discern furtive movements in the shadows. "Butler, could you hand me the goggles?" Butler plucked a set of night vision glasses from his belt and placed them in Artemis's outstretched hand. The focus motor buzzed to suit the light. Artemis fixed the glasses to his face. Everything became radioactive green. Taking a deep breath, he turned his gaze to the squirming shadows. Something squatted on a raffia mat, shifting uneasily in the almost non-existent light. Artemis fine-tuned the focus. The figure was small, abnormally so, and wrapped in a filthy shawl. Empty spirit jugs were half buried in the mud around her. One forearm poked from the material. It seemed green, but then so did everything else. "Madam," he said, "I have a proposition for you." The figure's head wobbled sleepily. "Wine," she rasped, her voice like nails on a school chalkboard. "Wine. English." Artemis smiled. "The gift of tongues. Check. Aversion to the light. Check. Irish, actually. Now, about my proposition." The healer shook a bony finger craftily. "Wine first, then talk." "Butler?" The bodyguard reached into a pocket and drew out a half pint of the finest Irish whiskey. Artemis took the bottle and held it teasingly beyond the shadows. He barely had time to remove his goggles when the claw-like hand darted from the gloom and snatched the whiskey. A mottled green hand, there was no doubt. Artemis swallowed a triumphant grin. "Pay our friend, Butler, in full. Remember, Mr. Wan, this is between us. You don't want Butler to come back, do you?" No, Master Fowl. My lips are sealed." "They had better be, or Butler will seal them permanently." Wynne skipped off down the alley, so relieved to be alive that he didn't bother counting the sheaf of U.S. currency. Most unlike him. In any event, it was all there, all $20,000. Not bad for half an hour's work. Artemis turned back to the healer. "Now, madam, you have something that I want." The healer's tongue caught a drop of alcohol at the corner of her mouth. "Yes, Irish. Sore head, bad tooth. I heal." Artemis replaced the night vision goggles and squatted to her level. "I am perfectly healthy, ma'am, apart from a slight dust mite allergy. And I don't think even you can do anything about that. No, what I want from you is your book." The hag froze. Bright eyes glinted from beneath the shawl. "Book?" she said cautiously. "I don't know about no book. I am a healer. You want book? Go to library." Artemis sighed with exaggerated patience. "You are no healer. You are a sprite, pajog, fairy, Cataloon." I'm going to try to guess how to pronounce these words because I haven't, thought of them or, read them mentally in years. So we're going to just guess, guys. Cataloon, whichever language you prefer to use. And I want your book. For a long moment, the creature said nothing, and then she threw back her shawl from her forehead. In the green glow of the night vision goggles, her features leaped at Artemis, like a Halloween mask. The fairy's nose was long and hooked under two slitted golden eyes. Her ears were pointed, and the alcohol addiction had melted her skin like putty. "If you know about the book, human," she said slowly, fighting the numbing effect of the whiskey, "then you know about the magic I have in my fist. I can kill you with a snap of my fingers." Artemis shrugged. "I think not. Look at you. You're dead. The rice wine has diluted your senses, reduced to healing warts. Pathetic. I'm here to save you in return for the book." "What could a human want with our book?" "This is no concern of yours. All you need to know are your options." The sprite's pointed ears quivered. "Options? 1, you refuse to give us the book and we go home, leaving you to rot in this sewer." "Yes," said the fairy. "I choose this option." "Ah, no. Don't be so eager. If we leave without the book, you will be dead in a day." "A day? A day?" The healer laughed. "I will outlive you by a century. Even fairies tethered to the human realm can survive the ages. Not with half a pint of holy water inside them," said Artemis, tapping the now empty whiskey bottle. The fairy blanched, then screamed, a high, keening, horrible sound. "Holy water? You've murdered me, human." "True," Artemis admitted. "She'll start to burn any minute now." The fairy poked her stomach tentatively. "The second option? Listening now, are we? Very well, then. Option 2, you give me the book for 30 minutes only. Then I return your magic to you." The sprite's jaw dropped. "Return my magic? Not possible." "Oh, but it is. I have in my possession 2 ampoules. 1, a vial of spring water from the fairy well 60 meters below the Ring of Tara, possibly the most magical place on Earth. This will counteract the holy water." "And the other?" "The other is a little shot of man-made magic, a virus that feeds on alcohol mixed with a growth agent. It will flush every drop of rice wine from your body, remove the dependence, and even bolster your failing liver. It'll be messy, but after a day, you'll be zipping around as though you were 1,000 years old again." The sprite licked her lips. To be able to rejoin the people? Tempting. "How do I know to trust you, human? You've tricked me once already." "Good point. Here's the deal. I give you the water on faith. Then, after I have had a look at the book, you get the bolster. Take it or leave it." The fairy considered. The pain was already curling around in her abdomen. She thrust out her wrist. "I'll take it." "I thought you might. Butler?" The giant manservant unwrapped a soft velcroed case containing a syringe gun and 2 vials. He loaded the clear one, shooting it into the sprite's clammy arm. The fairy stiffened momentarily and then relaxed. "Strong magic," she breathed. "Yes, but not as strong as your own will be when I give you the second injection. Now, the book." The sprite reached into the folds of her filthy robe, rummaging for an age. Artemis held his breath. This was it. Soon the Fowls would be great again. A new empire would rise, with Artemis Fowl, the second at its head. The fairy woman withdrew a closed fist. Now, no use to you anyways, written in the old tongue. Artemis nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She opened her knobby fingers. Lying in the palm was a teeny golden volume the size of a matchbook. Here, human. 30 of your minutes, no more. Butler took the tiny tome reverentially. The bodyguard activated a compact digital camera and began photographing each wafer-thin page of the book. The process took several minutes. When he was finished, the entire volume was stored on the camera's chip. Artemis preferred not to take chances with information. Airport security equipment had been known to wipe many a vital disk, so he instructed the aide to transfer the file to his portable phone, and from there email it to Fowl Manor in Dublin. Before the 30 minutes were up, the file containing every symbol in the fairy book was sitting safely in the Fowl server. Artemis returned the tiny volume to its owner. Nice doing business with you. The sprite lurched to her knees. The other potion, human? Artemis smiled. Oh, yes, the restoring booster. I suppose I did promise. Yes, human promised. Very well, but before we administer it, I must warn you that purging is not pleasant. You are not going to enjoy this one bit. The fairy gestured around her and the squalid filth. You think I enjoy this? I want to fly again. Butler loaded the second vial, shooting this one straight into the carotid artery. The sprite immediately collapsed on the mat, her entire frame quivering violently. Time to leave, commented Artemis. 100 years of alcohol leaving a body by any means possible is not a pretty sight. Butler had been serving the fowls for centuries. The butlers had been serving the fowls for centuries. It had always been that way. Indeed, there were several eminent linguists of the option that this was how the common noun had originated. The first record of this unusual arrangement was when Virgil Butler had been contracted as servant, bodyguard, and cook to Lord Hugo de Fouillé for one of the first great Norman Crusades. At the age of 10, Butler children were sent to private training center in Israel, where they were taught the specialized skills necessary to guard the latest in the fowl line. These skills included cordon bleu cooking, marksmanship, a customized blend of martial arts, emergency medicine, and information technology. If at the end of their training there was not a fowl to guard, then the butlers were eagerly snapped up as bodyguards for various royal personages, generally in Monaco or Saudi Arabia. Once a fowl and a butler were put together, they were paired for life. It was a demanding job and lonely, but the rewards were handsome if you survived to enjoy them. If not, then your family received a six-figure settlement plan. Plus a monthly pension. The current butler had been guarding young Master Artemis for 12 years, since the moment of his birth, and though they adhered to the old age formalities, they were much more than master and servant. Artemis was the closest thing Butler had to a friend, and Butler was the closest Artemis had to a father, albeit one who obeyed orders. Butler held his tongue until they were aboard the Heathrow connection from Bangkok. Then he had to ask, Artemis? Artemis looked up from the screen of his power book. He was getting a head start on the translation. Yes? Yes? The sprite. Why didn't we simply keep the book and leave her to die? A corpse is evidence, Butler. My way, the people will have no reason to be suspicious. But the sprite? I hardly think she will confess to showing humans the book. In any case, I mixed a slight amnesiac into her second injection. When she finally wakes up, the last week will be a blur. Butler nodded, appreciatively. Always 2 steps ahead. That was Master Artemis. People said he was a chip off the old block. They were wrong. Artemis was a brand new block, the likes of which had never been seen before. Doubts assuaged, Butler returned to his copy of Guns and Ammo. leaving his employer to unravel the secrets of the universe. Next chapter. Chapter 2. Translation. By now you must have guessed just how far Artemis Fowl was prepared to go in order to achieve his goal. But what exactly was this goal? What outlandish scheme would involve the blackmailing of an alcohol-addicted sprite? The answer was gold. Artemis's search had begun 2 years previously when he first became interested in surfing the internet. He quickly found the more arcane sites, alien abductions, UFO sightings, and the supernatural, but most specifically, the existence of the people. Trawling through gigabytes of data, he found hundreds of references to fairies from nearly every country in the world. Each civilization had its own term for the people, but they were undoubtedly members of the same hidden family. Several stories mentioned a book carried by each fairy. It was their Bible, containing, as it allegedly did, the history of their race and the commandments that govern their extended lives. Of course, this book was written in Gnomish, the fairy language, and would be of no use to any human. Artemis believed that with today's technology, the book could be translated, and with this translation, you could begin to exploit a whole new group of creatures. Know thine enemy was Artemis's motto. So he immersed himself in the lore of the people until he had compiled a huge database on their characteristics. But it wasn't enough. So Artemis put out the call on the web. Irish businessman will pay large amount of US dollars to meet a fairy, sprite, leprechaun, pixie. The responses had been mostly fraudulent, but Ho Chi Minh City had finally paid off. Artemis was perhaps the only person alive who would take full advantage of his recent acquisition. He still retained a childlike belief in magic, tempered by an adult determination to exploit it. If there was anybody capable of relieving the fairies of some of their magical gold, it was Artemis Fowl II. It was early morning before they reached Fowl Manor. Artemis was anxious to bring up the file in his computer, but first he decided to call in on his mother. Angeline Fowl was bedridden. She had been since her husband's disappearance. Nervous tension, the physician said. Nothing for it but rest and sleeping pills. That was almost a year ago. Butler's little sister Juliet was sitting at the foot of the stairs. Her gaze was boring a hole into the wall. Even the glitter mascara couldn't soften her expression. Artemis had seen that look already, just before Juliet had suplexed a particularly impudent pizza boy. The suplex, Artemis gathered, was a wrestling move, an unusual obsession for a teenage girl. But then again, she was, after all, a butler. Problems, Juliet? Juliet straightened hurriedly. My own fault, Artemis. Apparently, I left a gap in the curtains. Miss Fowl couldn't sleep. Artemis muttered, scaling the oak staircase. Slowly. He worried about his mother's condition. She hadn't seen the light of day in a long time now. Then again, should she miraculously recover, emerging revitalized from her bedchamber, it would signal the end of Artemis's own extraordinary freedom. It would be back off to school and no more super hurting criminal enterprises for you, my boy. He knocked gently on the arched double doors. Mother, you awake? Something smashed against the other side of the door. It sounded expensive. Of course I'm awake. How can I sleep in this blinding glare? Artemis ventured inside, an antique 4-poster bed through shadowy spires in the darkness, and a pale sliver of light poked through a gap in the velvet curtains. Angeline Fowl sat hunched on the bed, her pale limbs glowing white in the gloom. Artemis, darling, where have you been? Artemis sighed. She recognized him. That was a good sign. School trip, Mother. Skiing in Austria. Ah, skiing, crooned Angeline. How I miss it. Maybe when your father returns. Artemis felt a lump in his throat. Most uncharacteristic. Yes, perhaps when father returns. Darling, could you close those wretched curtains? The light is intolerable. Of course, Mother. Artemis felt his way across the room, wary of the low-level clothes chests scattered around the floor. Finally, his fingers curled around the velvet drapes. For a moment, he was tempted to throw them wide open. Then he sighed and closed the gap. Thank you, darling. By the way, we really have to get rid of that maid. She's good for absolutely nothing. Artemis held his tongue. Juliet had been a hard-working, loyal member of the Fowl household for the past 3 years. Time to use Mother's absent-mindedness to his advantage. You're right, of course, Mother. I've been meaning to do it for some time. Butler has a sister I believe would be perfect for the position. I think I've mentioned her. Juliet? Angeline frowned. Juliet. Yes, the name does seem familiar. Well, anyone would be better than that silly girl we have now. When can she start? Straight away. I'll have Butler fetch her from the lodge. You're a good boy, Artemis. Now give Mummy a hug. Artemis stepped into the shadowy folds of his mother's robe. She smelled perfumed, like petals and water, but her arms were cold and weak. Oh, darling, she whispered. The sound sent goosebumps popping down Artemis's neck. I hear things at night. They crawl along the pillows and into my ears. Artemis felt that lump in his throat again. Perhaps we should open the curtains, Mother. No. His mother sobbed, releasing him from her grasp. No, because then I could see them too. Mother, please. But it was no use. Angeline was gone. She crawled to the far corner of the bed, pulling the quilt under her chin. Send the new girl. Yes, Mother. Send her with cucumber slices and water. Yes, Mother. Angeline glared at him with crafty eyes. And stop calling me Mother. I don't know who you are, but you're certainly not my little Artie. Artemis blinked back a few rebellious tears. Of course. Sorry. Don't come back here again, or I'll have my husband take care of you. He's a very important man, you know. Very well, Miss Fowl. This is the last you'll see of me. It had better be. Angeline froze suddenly. Do you hear them? Artemis shook his head. No, I don't hear any. They're coming for me. They're everywhere. Angeline dived for cover beneath the bedclothes. Artemis could still hear her terrified sobs as he descended the marble staircase. The book was proving far more stubborn than Artemis had anticipated. It seemed to be almost actively resisting him. No matter which program he ran it through, the computer came up blank. Artemis hard-copied every page, tacking them to the walls of his study. Sometimes it helped to have things on paper. The script was like nothing he'd seen before, and yet it was strangely familiar. Obviously a mixture of symbolic and character-based language. The text meandered around the page in no apparent order. What the program needed was some frame of reference, some central point on which to build. He separated all the characters and ran comparisons with English, Chinese, Greek, Arabic, and Cyrillic texts. Even with Ogham, nothing. Moody with frustration, Artemis sent Juliet scurrying when she interrupted with sandwiches, and moved on to the symbols. The most frequently reoccurring pictogram was a small male figure. Male, he presumed, though with the limited knowledge of the furry anatomy, he supposed it could be female. A thought struck him. Artemis opened the ancient language file on his power translator and selected Egyptian. At last, a hit. The male symbol was remarkably similar to the Anubis god representation of Tutankhamun's inner chamber hieroglyphics. This was consistent with his other findings. The first written human stories were about fairies, suggesting that their civilization predated man's own. It would seem that Egyptians had simply adapted an existing scripture to suit their needs. There were other resemblances, but the characters were just dissimilar enough to slip through the computer's net. This would have to be done manually. Each gnomish figure had to be enlarged, printed, and then compared with the hieroglyphs. Artemis felt the excitement of success thumping inside his ribcage. Almost every fairy pictogram or letter had an Egyptian counterpart. Most were universal, such as the sun or the birds. Some seemed exclusively supernatural and had to be tailored to fit. The Anubis figure, for example, would make no sense as a dog god, so Artemis altered it to read King of the Fairies. By midnight, Artemis had successfully fed his findings into the Macintosh. All he had to do now was press decode. He did so. What emerged was a long, intricate string of meaningless gibberish. A normal child would have abandoned the task long since. The average adult would have probably been reduced to slapping the keyboard. But not Artemis. This book was testing him, and he would not allow it to win. The letters were right. He was certain of it. But it was just the order that was wrong. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, Artemis glared at the pages again. Each segment was bordered by a solid line. This could represent paragraphs or chapters, but they were not meant to be read in the usual left to right, top to bottom fashion. Artemis experimented. He tried the Arabic right to left, the Chinese columns, nothing worked. Then he noticed that each page had one thing in common, a central section. The other pictograms were arranged around this pivotal area, so a central starting point perhaps, but where to go from there? Artemis scanned the pages for some common factor. After several minutes, he found it. There was on each page a tiny spearhead in the corner of one section. This could be an arrow, a direction. Go this way. So the theory would be start in the middle, then follow the arrow, reading in spirals. The computer program wasn't built to handle something like this, so Artemis had to improvise. With a craft knife and a ruler, he dissected the first page of the book and reassembled it in the traditional Western languages order left to right, parallel rows. Then he re-scanned the page and fed it through the modified Egyptian translator. The computer hummed and whirred, converting all the information to binary. Several times it stopped to ask for confirmation of a character or symbol. This happened less and less as the machine learned the new language. Eventually, 2 words flashed on the screen. File converted. Fingers shaking from exhaustion and excitement, Artemis clicked print. A single page scrolled from the laser writer. It was in English now. Yes, there were mistakes, some fine-tuning needed, but it was perfectly legible, and more importantly, perfectly understandable. Fully aware that he was probably the first human in several thousand years to decode the magical words, Artemis switched on his desk light and began to read. The Book of the People. Begin instructions to our magics and life rules. Carry me always, carry me well. I am thy teacher of herb, and spell. I am thy link to power arcane. Forget me, and thy magic shall wane. 10 times, 10 commandments, there be. They will answer every mystery. Cures, curses, alchemy. These secrets shall be thine through me. But fairy, remember this above all. I am not for those in mud that crawl. And forever doomed shall be the one who betrays my secrets one by one. Artemis could hear the blood pumping in his ears. He had them. They could be as ants beneath his feet. Their every secret would be laid bare by technology. Suddenly, the exhaustion claimed him, and he sank back in his chair. There was so much yet complete. 43 pages to be translated for start. pressed the intercom button that linked him to the speakers all over the house. "Butler, get Juliet and come up here. There's some jigsaws I need you to assemble." Perhaps a little family history would be useful at this point. The Fowls were, indeed, legendary criminals. For generations, they had skirmished on the wrong side of the law, hoarding enough funds to become legitimate. Of course, once they were legitimate, they found it not to their liking, and returned almost immediately to crime. It was Artemis I, our subject's father, who had thrown the family fortune into jeopardy. With the breaking up of communist Russia, Artemis Sr. had decided to invest in a huge chunk of the Fowl fortune in establishing new shipping lines to vast continent. The new consumers, he reasoned, would need new consumer goods. The Russian mafia did not take too kindly to a Westerner muscling in on their market, and so decided to send a little message. This message took the form of a stolen missile launched at the Fowl Star on her way past Murmansk. Artemis Sr. was on board the ship, along with Butler's uncle and 250,000 cans of cola. It was quite an explosion. The Fowls were not left destitute. Far from it, but billionaire status was no longer theirs. Artemis II vowed to remedy this. He would restore the family fortune, and he would do it in his own unique fashion. Once the book was translated, Artemis could begin planning in earnest. He already knew what the ultimate goal was. Now he could figure out how to achieve it. Gold, of course, was the objective. The acquisition of gold. It seemed that the people were almost as fond of the precious metal as humans. Each fairy had its own cache, but not for much longer if Artemis had his way. There would be at least one of the fairy folk wandering around with empty pockets by the time he'd finished. After 18 solid hours of sleep and a light continental breakfast, Artemis climbed up to the study that he had inherited from his father. It was a traditional enough room, dark oak, floor-to-ceiling shelving. But Artemis had jammed it with the latest computer technology, a series of networked Apple Macs whirred from various corners of the room. One was running CNN's website through a DAT projector, throwing oversized current affair images against the black wall. Butler was there already, firing up the hard drives. "Shut them all down, except the book. I need quiet for this." The manservant started. The CNN site had been running for almost a year. Artemis was convinced that the news of his father's rescue would come from there. Shutting it down meant he was finally letting go. "All of them?" Artemis glanced at the back wall for a moment. "Yes," he said finally, "all of them." Butler took the liberty of patting his employer gently on the shoulder, just once, before returning to work. Artemis cracked his knuckles. Time to do what he did best: plot dastardly acts. Next chapter is called Holly. Holly Short was lying in bed, silently fuming. Nothing unusual about this. Leprechauns in general were not known for their gentiality. But Holly was in an exceptionally bad mood, even for a fairy. Technically, she was an elf, fairy being a general term. She was a leprechaun too, but that was just a job. Perhaps a description would be more helpful than a lecture on fairy genealogy. Holly had short, nut-brown skin, cropped auburn hair, and hazel eyes. Her nose had a hook, and her mouth was plump and cherubic, which was appropriate considering Cupid was her great-grandfather. Her mother was a European elf with a fiery temper and willowy figure. Holly, too, had a slim frame with long tapered fingers, perfect for wrapping around a buzz baton. Her ears, of course, were pointed, at exactly 3 feet in height. Holly was only a centimeter above the fairy average, but even 1 centimeter can make an awful lot of difference when you don't have many to spare. Commander Root was the cause of Holly's distress. Root had been on Holly's case since day one. The commander had decided to take offense at the fact that the first female officer in Recon's history had been assigned to his squad. Recon was a notoriously dangerous posting with a high fatality rate, and Root didn't think it was a place for a girlie. He was just going to have to get used to the idea, because Holly Short had no intention of quitting for him or anybody else. Though she'd never admit it, another possible cause for Holly's irritability was the ritual. She'd been meaning to perform it for several moons now, but somehow there just never seemed to be time. And if Root found out she was running low on magic, she'd be transferred to traffic for sure. Holly rolled off her futon and stumbled into the shower. That was one advantage of living near the Earth's core. The water was always hot. No natural light, of course, but that was a small price to pay for privacy. Underground. The last human-free zone. There was nothing like coming home after a long day on the job, switching off your shield, and sinking into a bubbling slime pool. Bliss. The fairy suited up, zipping the dull green jumpsuit up to her chin and strapping on her helmet. Leprechaun uniforms were stylish these days. Not that top-of-the-morning costume the Force had to wear back in the old days. Buckled shoes and knickerbockers? Honestly, no wonder leprechauns were such ridiculous figures in human folklore. Still, probably better that way. If the mud people knew the word leprechaun actually originated from Lep-Recon, an elite branch of the lower elements police, they'd probably take steps to stamp them out. Better to stay inconspicuous and let humans have their stereotypes. With the moon already rising on the surface, there was no time for a proper breakfast. Holly grabbed the remains of a nettle smoothie from the cooler and drank it in the tunnels. As usual, there was chaos in the main thoroughfare. Airborne sprites jammed the avenue like stones in a bottle. The gnomes weren't helping either, lumbering along with their big swinging behinds, blocking 2 lanes. Swear-toads infested every damp patch, cursing like sailors. That particular breed began as a joke but had multiplied into an epidemic. Someone lost their wand over that one. Holly battled through the crowds of the police station. There was already a riot outside Spud Emporium. Lep Corporal Newt was trying to sort it out. Good luck to him. Nightmare. At least Holly had the chance to work above ground. The Lep station's doors were crammed with protesters. The Goblin Dwarf turf war had flared up again, and every morning, hordes of angry parents showed up demanding the release of their innocent offspring. Holly snorted. If there actually was an innocent goblin, Holly Short had yet to meet him. They were clogging up the cells now, howling gang chants and hurling fireballs at each other. Holly shouldered her way through the throng. "Coming through," she grunted. "Police business." They were on her like flies on a stinkworm. My Grumpo is innocent. Police brutality. "Officer, could you take my baby and his blankie? He can't sleep without it." Holly set her visors to reflect and ignored them all. Once upon a time, the uniform would have earned you some respect. Not anymore. Now you were a target. "Excuse me, officer, but I seem to have misplaced my jar of warts. Pardon me, young elf. My cat's climbed into a stalactite. Or, if you have a minute, Captain, could you tell me how to get to the Fountain of Youth?" Holly shuddered. Tourists. She had troubles of her own, more than she knew, and she was about to find out. In the station lobby, a kleptomaniac dwarf was busy picking the pockets of everyone else in the booking line, including the officer he was handcuffed to. Holly gave him a swipe in the backside with her buzz baton. The electric charge cinched the seat of his leather pants. "What you doing there, Mulch?" Mulch started, contraband dropping from his sleeves. "Officer Short," he whined, his face a mask of regret. "I can't help myself. It's my nature." "I know that, Mulch, and it's our nature to throw you in a cell for a couple centuries." She winked at the dwarf's arresting officer. Nice to see you're staying alert. The elf blushed, kneeling to pick up his wallet and badge. Holly forged past Root's office, hoping she could make it to her cubicle before Short! Get in here. Holly sighed. Ah, well, here we go again. Stowing her helmet under her arm, Holly smoothed the creases from her uniform and stepped into Commander Root's office. Root's face was purple with rage. This was more or less his general state of existence, a fact that had earned him the nickname Beetroot. There was an office pool running on how long he had before his heart exploded. The smart money was on half a century at the outside. Commander Root was tapping the moon meter on his wrist. Well, he demanded. What time do you call this? Holly could feel her own face coloring. She was barely a minute late. There were at least a dozen officers on this shift who hadn't even reported in yet, but Root always singled her out for persecution. The thoroughfare, she mumbled lamely. There were 4 lanes down. Don't insult me with your excuses, roared the commander. You know what the city center is like. Get up a few minutes earlier. It was true. She did know what Haven was like. Holly Short was a city elf born and bred. Since the humans had begun experimenting with mineral drilling, more and more fairies had been driven out of the shallow forts and into the depths and security of Haven City. The metropolis was overcrowded and underserviced, and now there was a lobby to allow automobiles in the pedestrianized city center. As if the place wasn't smelly enough already with all those country gnomes lumbering around the place. Root was right. She should get up a bit earlier, but she wouldn't. Not until everyone else was forced to. I know what you're thinking, said Root. Why am I picking on you every day? Why don't I ever bawl out those other layabouts? Holly said nothing, but agreement was written all over her face. I'll tell you why, shall I? Holly risked a nod. It's because you're a girl. Holly felt her fingers curl into a fist. She knew it. But not for the reasons you think, continued Root. You're the first girl in recon, ever. You were a test case. A beacon. There are a million fairies out there watching your every move. There are a lot of hopes riding on you. There's a lot of prejudice against you, too. The future of law enforcement is in your hands, and at the moment, I'd say it's a little heavy. Holly blinked. Root had never said anything like this before. Usually it was just fix your helmet, stand up straight, blah, blah, blah. You have to be the best you can be, Short, and that has to be better than anybody else. Root sighed, sinking into his swivel chair. I don't know, Holly. Ever since that Hamburg incident. Holly winced. The Hamburg incident had been a total disaster. One of her perps had skipped out to the surface and tried bargaining with the mud people for asylum. Root had to stop time, call in retrieval squad, and do 4 memory wipes. A lot of police time wasted. All her fault. The commander took a form from his desk. It's no use. I've made up my mind. I'm putting you on traffic and bringing in Corporal Frond. Frond? Exploded Holly. She's a bimbo, an airhead. You can't make her the test case. Root's face turned an even deeper shade of purple. I can, and I will. Why shouldn't I? You've never given me your best. Either that or your best just isn't good enough. Sorry, Short. You had your chance. The commander turned back to his paperwork. The meeting was over. Holly could only stand there aghast. She'd blown it. The best career opportunity she was ever likely to get, and she tossed it into the gutter. One mistake, and her future was past. It wasn't fair. Holly felt an uncharacteristic anger take over her. But she swallowed it. This was no time to lose her temper. Commander Root, sir, I feel I deserve one more chance. Root didn't even look up from the paperwork. And why is that? Holly took a deep breath. Because of my record, sir. Speaks for itself. apart from the Hamburg thing. 10 successful recons, not a single memory wipe or time stop apart from the Hamburg thing. Completed Root. Holly took a chance. If I were a male, one of your precious sprites, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Root glanced up sharply. Now just a minute, Captain Short. He was interrupted by the bleeping of one of the phones on his desk. Then 2, then 3. A giant view screen crackled to life on the wall behind him. Root jabbed the speaker button, putting all the callers on conference. Yes? We've got a runner. Root nodded. Anything on Scopes? Scopes was the shop name for the shrouded trackers, attached to American communication satellites. Yep, said caller 2. Big blip in Europe. Southern Italy. No shield. Root cursed. An unshielded fairy could be seen by mortal eyes. That wasn't so bad if the perp was humanoid. Classification? Bad news, Commander, said the third caller. We got us a rogue troll. Root rubbed his eyes. Why did these things always happen on his watch? Holly could understand his frustration. Trolls were the meanest of the deep tunnel creatures. They wandered the labyrinth, preying on anything unlucky enough to cross their path. Their teeny brains had no room for rules or restraint. Occasionally, one found its way into the shaft of a pressure elevator. Usually, the concentrated air current fried them, but sometimes one survived and was blasted to the surface. Driven crazy by pain, even the teeniest amount of life, they would generally proceed to destroy everything in their path. Root shook his head rapidly, recovering himself. Okay, Captain Short. Looks like you get your chance. You're running hot, I take it? Yes, sir, lied Holly, all too aware that Root suspended her immediately if he knew she'd neglected the ritual. Good. Then sign yourself out of sidearm and proceed to the target area. Holly glanced at the view screen. Scopes were sending high-res shots of an Italian fortified town. A red dot was moving rapidly through the countryside, toward the human population. Do a thorough reconnaissance and report in. Do not attempt a retrieval. Is that understood? Yes, sir. We lost 6 men to a troll last quarter. 6 men. That was below ground in familiar territory. I understand, sir. Root pursed his lips doubtfully. Do you understand, Short? Do you really? I think so, sir. Have you ever seen what a troll can do to flesh and bone? No, sir. Not up close. Good. Let's not make today your first time. Understood. Root glared at her. I don't know why it is, Captain Short, but whenever you start agreeing with me, I get decidedly nervous. Root was right to be nervous. If he'd known how this straightforward recon assignment was going to turn out, he would probably have retired then and there. Tonight, history was going to be made, and it wasn't the discovery of radium. First man on the moon, happy kind of history. It was the Spanish Inquisition. Here comes the Hindenburg, bad kind of history. Bad for humans and fairies. Bad for everyone. Holly proceeded directly to the chutes. Her normally chatty mouth was a grim slash of determination. One chance. That was it. She would allow nothing to break her concentration. There was the usual line of holiday visa hopefuls stretching to the corner of the elevator plaza, but Holly bypassed it, waving her badge at the waiting line. A truculent gnome refused to yield. How come you LEP guys get to go topside? What's so special about you? Holly breathed deeply through her nose. Courtesy at all times. Police business, sir. Now if you could just excuse me. The gnome scratched his massive behind. I hear you LEP guys make up your police business just to get a look at some moonlight. That's what I hear. Holly attempted an amused smile. What actually formed on her lips resembled a lemon-sucking grimace. Whoever told you that is an idiot, sir. Recon only ventures above ground when absolutely necessary. The gnome frowned. Obviously, he had made up the rumor himself and suspected that Holly might have called him an idiot. By the time he'd figured it out, she had skipped through the double doors. Foley was waiting for her in ops. Foley was a paranoid centaur, convinced that human intelligence agencies were monitoring his transport and surveillance network. To prevent them from reading his mind, he wore a tinfoil hat at all times. He glanced up sharply when Holly entered through the pneumatic double doors. "Anybody see you come in here?" Holly thought about it. "The FBI, CIA, NSA, DEA, MI6, oh, and the EIB. Foley frowned. "The EIB? Everyone in the building." Holly smirked. Foley rose from his swivel chair and clip-clopped over to her. "Oh, you're very funny, Short. A regular riot. I thought the Hamburg incident might have knocked some of the cockiness out of you. If I were you, I'd concentrate on the job in hand." Holly composed herself. He was right. "Okay, Foley, fill me in." Centaur pointed to the live feed from the Eurosat, which was displayed on a large plasma screen. "The red dot is the troll. He's moving towards Martina Franca, a fortified town near the city of Brindisi. As far as we can tell, he stumbled into vent E7. It was on cooldown after a surface short. That's why the troll is a crispy barbecue right now." Holly grimaced. "Charming," she thought. "We've been lucky in that our target has bumped into some food along the way. He chewed on a couple of cows for an hour or two, so that buys a bit of time." "A couple of cows? Just how big is this fellow?" Foley adjusted his foil bonnet. "Bull troll, fully grown, 180 kilos, with husks like a wild boar. A really wild boar." Holly swallowed. Suddenly recon seemed a much better job than retrieval. "Right. What have you got for me?" Foley cantered across the equipment table. He selected what looked like a regular wristwatch. "Locator? You find him, we find you. Routine stuff. Video?" The centaur clipped a small cylinder into the accommodating groove on Holly's helmet. "Live feed. Nuclear battery. No time limit. The mic is voice activated." "Good," said Holly. "Root said I should take a weapon on this one, just in case." "Way ahead of you." Foley picked a platinum handgun from the file. "A Neutrino 2000, the latest model. Even the tunnel gangs don't have these. 3 settings if you don't mind. Scorched, well done, and crisped to a cinder. Nuclear power source too, so plug away. This baby will outlive you by 1,000 years." Holly strapped the lightweight weapon to her shoulder holster. "I'm ready, I think." Foley chuckled. "I doubt it. No one's ever really ready for a troll." "Thanks for the confidence booster." "Confidence is ignorance," advised the centaur. "If you're feeling cocky, it's because there's something you don't know." Holly thought about arguing, but didn't. Maybe it was because she had a sneaking suspicion that Foley was right. The pressure elevators were powered by gaseous columns vented from the Earth's core. The Leptech boys, under Foley's guidance, had fashioned titanium eggs that could ride on the currents. They had their own independent motors, but for an express ride to the surface, there was nothing like a blast from a tidal flare. Foley led her past a long line of chute bays to E7. The pod sat in its clamp, looking very fragile to be rocketing about on a magma stream. Its underside was charred black and pockmarked from shrapnel. The centaur slapped it fondly on the fender. "This baby's been in service for 50 years. Oldest model, still in the chutes." Holly swallowed. The chutes made her nervous enough without riding in an antique. "When does it come offline?" Foley scratched his hairy belly. "With funding the way it is, not until we have us a fatality." Holly cranked open the heavy door, a rubber seal yielding with a hiss. The pod was not built for comfort. There was barely enough space for a restraining seat amongst the jumble of electronics. "What's that?" Holly asked, pointing to a grayish stain on the seat headrest. Foley shuffled uncomfortably. brain fluid, I think. We had a pressure leak on the last mission, but that's plugged now. And the officer lived. Down a few IQ points, but alive. And he can still take liquids. Well, that's all right then, Holly quipped, threading her way through the mass of wires. Foley strapped the harness under her, checking the restraints thoroughly. All set? Holly nodded. Foley tapped her helmet mic. Keep in touch, he said, pulling the door closed behind her. Don't think about it, Holly told herself. Don't think about the white-hot magma flow that's going to engulf this teeny craft. Don't think about hurtling towards the surface with a Mach 2 force trying to turn you inside out. And certainly don't think about the blood-crazed troll ready to disembowel you with his tusks. Nope, don't think about any of that stuff. Too late. Foley's voice sounded in her earpiece. T-minus 20. He said, we're on a secure channel in case the mud people have started underground monitoring. You never know. An oil tanker from the Middle East intercepted a transmission one time. What a mess that was. Holly adjusted her helmet mic. Focus, Foley. My life is in your hands here. Okay, sorry. We're going to use the rail to drop you into E7's main shaft. There's a surge due any minute that should see you past the first 100 clicks. Then you're on your own. Holly nodded, curling her fingers around the twin joysticks. All systems check, fired up. There's a whoosh as the pod's engines ignited. The tiny craft jostled in its housing, shaking Holly like a bead in a rattle. She could barely hear Foley speaking in her ear. You're in the secondary shaft now. Get ready to fly short. Holly pulled a rubber cylinder from the dash and slipped it between her teeth. No good having a radio if you swallowed your tongue. She activated the external cameras and put the view on the screen. The entrance to E7 was creeping towards her. The air was shimmering in the landing light glow. White-hot sparks tumbled into the secondary shaft. Holly couldn't hear the roar, but she could imagine it. A raw, skinning wind, like a million trolls howling. Her fingers tightened around the joysticks. The pod shuddered to a halt at the lip. The chute stretched above and below, massive, boundless, like dropping an ant down a drain pipe. Righto, crackled Foley. Hold on to your breakfast. Roller coasters ain't got nothing on this. Holly nodded. She couldn't speak with the rubber in her mouth. A centaur wouldn't be able to see her in the pod cam anyway. Sayonara, sweetheart, said Foley, and then pressed the button. The pod's clamp tilted, rolling Holly into the abyss. Her stomach tightened as G-force took hold, dragging her to the center of the earth. The seismology section had 1 million probes down here, with a 99.8 success rate at predicting the magma flares, but there was always that 0.2%. The fall seemed to last for an eternity. And just when Holly had mentally consigned herself to the scrap heap, she felt it, an uncomfortable vibration, the feeling that outside her teeny sphere the whole world was being shaken apart. Here it comes. Fins, she said, spitting the word around the cylinder. Foley may have replied, but she couldn't hear him anymore. Holly couldn't even hear herself, but she did see the stabilization fins slide out from the monitor. The flare caught her like a hurricane, spinning the pod at first until the fins caught. Half-melted rocks pelted the craft's underside, jolting it towards the chute walls. Holly compensated with bursts from the joystick. The heat was tremendous in the confined space, enough to fry a human, but fairy lungs are made of stronger stuff. The acceleration dragged at her body with invisible hands, stretching the flesh over her arms and face. Holly blinked salty sweat from her eyes and concentrated on the monitor. The flare had totally engulfed her pod, and it was a big one, too. Force 7 at the very least. A good 1,000-foot girth, orange-striped magma swirled and hissed around her, searching for a weak point in the metal casing. The pod groaned and complained. 50-year-old rivets threatened to pop. Holly shook her head. The first thing she was going to do on her return was kick Foley straight in the hairy behind. She felt like a nut inside a shell, between a gnome's molars. Doomed. A bull plate buckled, popped in as though punched by a giant fish. The pressure light blinked on. Holly could feel her head being squeezed. The eyes would be the first to go, popping like ripe berries. She checked the dials, 20 more seconds before she rode out the flare and was running on thermals. Those 20 seconds seemed like an age. Holly sealed the helmet to protect her eyes, riding out the final barrage of rocks. And suddenly, they were clear, sailing upward on the comparatively gentle spirals of hot air. Holly added her own thrusters to the upward force, no time to waste floating around in the wind. Above her, a circle of neon lights marked the docking zone. Holly swiveled horizontal and pointed the docking nodes at the lights. This was delicate. Many recon pilots had made it this far, only to miss the port and lose valuable time. Not Holly. She was a natural. First in the academy. She gave the thrusters one final squeeze and coasted the last 100 feet, using the rudders beneath her feet. She teased the pod through the circle of light and into its clamp on the landing pad. The nodes revolved, settling into their grooves. Safe. Holly smacked herself on the chest, releasing the safety harness. Once the door was open, sweet surface air flooded the cabin. There was nothing like that first breath after right in the chutes. She breathed deeply, purging stale pod air from her lungs. How had the people ever left the surface? Sometimes she wished that her ancestors had stayed to fight it out with the mud people. But there are too many of them. Unlike fairies who could produce only a single child every 20 years, mud people breed like rodents. Numbers would subdue even magic. Although she was enjoying the night air, Holly could taste traces of pollutants. The mud people had destroyed everything they came into contact with. Of course, they didn't live in the mud anymore. Not in this country, at least. Oh no. Big fancy dwellings with rooms for everything, rooms for sleeping, rooms for eating, even a room to go to the toilet. Indoors. Holly shuddered. Imagine going to the toilet inside your own home. Disgusting. The only good thing about going to the toilet was the minerals being returned to the earth. But the mud people had even managed to botch that up by treating the stuff with bottles of blue chemicals. If anyone had told her 100 years ago that the humans would be taking the fertile out of fertilizer, she would have told them to get some air holes drilled into their skull. Holly unhooked a set of wings from their bracket. They were double ovals with clunky motors. She moaned. Dragonflies. She hated that model. Gas engine, if you believe it, and heavier than a pig dipped in mud. Now the Hummingbird Z7, that was transport. Whisper silent with a satellite-bounced solar battery that could fly you twice around the world. But there were budget cuts, again. On her wrist, the locator began to beep. She was in range. Holly stepped out of the pod and onto the landing bay. She was inside a camouflage mound of earth, commonly known as a fairy fort. Indeed, the people used to live in these until they were driven deeper underground. There wasn't much technology, just a few external monitors, and a self-destruct device should the bay be discovered. There was nothing on the screens, all clear. Pneumatic doors were slightly askew where the troll had barged through, but otherwise everything seemed operational. Holly strapped on the wings and stepped into the outside world. The Italian night sky was crisp and brisk, infused with olives and vine. Crickets clicked in the rough grass, and moths fluttered in the starlight. Holly couldn't stop herself smiling. It was worth the risk, every bit of it. Speaking of risk, she checked the locator. The blip was much stronger now. The troll was almost at the town walls. She could appreciate nature after the mission was over. Now it was time for action. She primed the ring's motor, pulling the starter cord over her shoulder. Nothing. She fumed silently. Every spoiled kid in Haven had a hummingbird for their wilderness holidays, and here were the lep with wings that were junk when they were new. She yanked the cord again, and on the third wrench it caught, spewing a stream of smoke and fume into the night. About time, she grunted, flicking the throttle wide open, and wings flapped their way up to a steady beat. With not a little effort, lifted Captain Holly Short into the night sky. Even without the locator, the troll would have been easy to follow. It had left a trail of destruction wider than a tunnel excavator. Holly flew low, skipping between mist hazes and trees, matching the troll's course. The crazed creature had cut a swath through the middle of the vineyard, turned a stone wall to rubble, and left a guard dog gibbering under a hedge. Then she flew over the cows. It was not a pretty sight. Without going into detail, let's just say there wasn't much left besides horns and hooves. The red bip was louder now. Louder meant closer. She could see the town below her, nestled on top of a low hill, surrounded by crenellated walls from the Middle Ages. Lights still burned in most of the windows. Time for a little magic. A lot of magic attributed to the people is just superstition, but they do have certain powers. Healing, the mesmer, and shielding among them. Shielding is really a misnomer. The fairies actually do is vibrate at such a high frequency that they are never in one place long enough to be seen. Humans may notice a slight shimmer in the air as they are paying close attention, which they rarely are, and even then the shimmer is generally attributed to evaporation, typical of mud people to invent a complicated explanation for a simple phenomenon. Holly switched on her shield. It took a bit more out of her than usual. She could feel the strain of the beads of sweat on her forehead. I really should complete the ritual, she thought. The sooner the better. Some commotion below broke her into thoughts, something that didn't gel with the nighttime noises. Holly adjusted the trim of her backpack and flew in for a closer look. Look only, she reminded herself. That was her job. A recon officer was sent up with the chutes to pinpoint the target, while the retrieval boys took a nice cushy shuttle. The troll was directly below her, pounding against the town's outer wall, which was coming away in chunks beneath his powerful fingers. Holly sucked in a startled gasp. This guy was a monster, big as an elephant and 10 times as mean. But this particular beast was worse than mean. He was scared. Control, said Holly into her mic. Runner located. Situation critical topside. Root himself was on the other end of the comm link. Clarify, Captain. Holly pointed her video link at the troll. Runner's going through the town hall. Contact imminent. How far away is retrieval? ETA 5 minutes minimum. We're still in the shuttle. Holly bit her lip. Root was on the shuttle? That's too long, Commander. This whole town is going to explode in 10 seconds. I'm going in. Negative, Holly. Captain Short. You don't have an invite. You know the law. Hold your position. But, Commander. Root cut her off. No buts, Captain. Hang back. That's an order. Holly's entire body felt like a heartbeat. Gasoline fumes were addling her brain. What could she do? What was the right decision to make? Lives or orders? Then the troll broke through the wall, and a child's voice split into the night. Aitul, it screamed. Help, an invitation. At a stretch. Sorry, Commander, but the troll is light crazy, and there are children in there. She could imagine Root's face, purple with rage, as he spat into the mic. I'll have your stripes short. You'll spend the next 100 years on drain duty. But it was no use. Holly had disconnected her mic and swooped in after the troll. Steam lining her body, Captain Short ducked into the hole. She disappeared to be in a restaurant. A packed restaurant. The troll had been temporarily blinded by the electric light and was thrashing about in the center of the floor. The patrons were stunned. Even the child's plea had petered out. They sat gaping, party hats perched comically on their heads. Waiters froze, huge trays of pastas quivering on their splayed fingers. Chubby Italian infants covered their eyes with chubby fingers, and it was always like this in the beginning. The shocked silence, then came the screaming. A wine bottle crashed to the floor. It broke the spell. The pandemonium started. Holly winced. Trolls hated noise almost as much as light. The troll lifted massive shaggy shoulders, its retractable claws sliding out in an ominous shick. Classic predator behavior. The beast was about to strike. Holly drew her weapon and flicked it to the second setting. She couldn't kill the troll under any circumstances, not to save humans, but she could certainly put him out until retrieval arrived. Aiming for the weak point at the base of the skull, she let the troll have a long burst of concentrated ion ray. The beast staggered, fumbling a few steps, and then got very angry. "It's okay," thought Holly. "I'm shielded, invisible. 20 onlookers, it would have seemed like a pulsing blue beam emanated from thin air." I don't think that's any better. The troll rounded on her, its muddy dreadlocks swinging like candles. "No panic. It can't see me." The troll picked up a table. Invisible. Totally invisible. He pulled back a shaggy arm and let it fly. Just a slight shimmer in the air. The table tumbled straight towards her. Holly moved, a second too late. The table clipped her backpack and knocked the gas tank clean off. It spun through the air, trailing flammable fluid. Italian restaurants. Wouldn't you know it? Full of candles. The tank twirled right through an old elaborate candelabrum and burst into flames like some deadly firework. Most of the gas landed on the troll. So did Holly. The troll could see her. There was no doubt about it. It squinted at her through the hated light, its brows a rictus of pain and fear. Her shield was off. Her magic was gone. Holly twisted in the troll's grip, but it was useless. The creature's fingers were the size of bananas, but nowhere near as pliant. They were squashing the breath from her ribcage with savage ease. Needle-like claws were scraping at the toughened material of her uniform. Any second now, they would punch through, and that would be that. Holly couldn't think. The restaurant was a carousel of chaos. The troll was gnashing its tusks, greasy molars, trying to grip at her helmet. Holly could smell its faded breath through her filters. She could smell the odor of burning fur, too. As the fire spread along the troll's back, the beast's green tongue rasped around her visor, sliming the lower section. The visor, that was it. Her only chance. Holly wormed her free hand to the helmet controls. The tunnel lights, high beams. She depressed the sunken button, and 800 watts of unfiltered light blasted through the twin spotlights above her head. The troll reared back, penetrating scream exploding from between two rows of teeth. Dozens of glasses and bottles shattered where they stood. It was too much for the poor beast. Stunted, set on fire, now blinded. The shock and pain made their way through his tiny brain, ordering it to shut down. The troll complied, kneeling over with almost comical stiffness. Holly rolled to avoid scything tusks. There was complete silence, but for tinkling glass, crackling fur, and the sudden release of breath. Holly climbed shakily to her feet. There were a lot of eyes following her. Human eyes. She was 100% visible, and these humans couldn't stay complacent for long. This breed never did. Containment was the issue. She raised her empty palms, a gesture of peace. I don't know how to speak Italian. Susitemi tucci, she said, the language flowing easily from her tongue. The Italians were graceful, muttered that it was nothing. Holly reached slowly into her pocket and withdrew a small sphere. She had placed it in the middle of the floor. Gratate, she said. Look. The restaurant's patrons complied, leaning in to see a small silver ball. It was ticking, faster and faster, almost like a countdown. Holly turned her back to the sphere. 3, 2, 1, boom, flash. mass unconsciousness. Nothing fatal, but headaches, all around in about 40 minutes. Holly sighed. Safe. For the moment. She ran to the door and slid the latch across. Nobody was going in or out except through the big gaping hole in the wall. Next, she doused the smoldering troll with the contents of the restaurant's fire extinguisher, hoping the icy powder wouldn't revive the sleeping behemoth. Holly surveyed the mess she had created. There was no doubt it was in shambles, worse than Hamburg. Root would skin her alive. She'd rather face the troll any day. This was the end of her career for sure, but suddenly that didn't seem so important because her ribs were aching, and she was blinder of a pressure headache coming on. Perhaps a rest, just for a second, so she could pull herself together before retrieval showed up. Holly didn't even bother looking for a chair. She simply allowed her legs to buckle beneath her, sinking to the chessboard linoleum floor. Waking up to Commander Root's bulging features is the stuff of nightmares. Holly's eyes flickered open, and for a second she could have sworn that there was concern in those eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a customary vein-popping fury. "Captain Short," he roared, mindless of her headache. What in the name of sanity happened here? Holly rose shakily to her feet. There was. The sentences just wouldn't come out. "You disobeyed a direct order. I told you to hang back. You know it's forbidden to enter a human building without an invitation." Holly shook the shadows from her vision. "I got invited in. A child called for help." "You're on shaky ground there, Short. There is a precedent, sir. Corporal Rowe versus the state. The jury ruled that the trapped woman's cry for help could be accepted as an invitation into the building. Anyways, you're all here now. That means you accepted the invitation too." Said Root doubtfully. "I suppose you were lucky. Things could have been worse." Holly looked around. Things couldn't have been a lot worse. The establishment was pretty trashed, and there were 40 humans out for the count. The tech boys were attaching mind-wipe electrodes to the temples of unconscious diners. We managed to secure the area in spite of half the town hammering on the door. "What about the hole?" Root smirked. "See for yourself." Holly glanced over. Retrieval had jimmied a hologram lead into the existing electricity sockets and were projecting an unbattered wall over the hole. The hologram were handy for quick patches, but no good under scrutiny. Anyone who examined the wall too closely would have noticed that the slightly transparent patch was exactly the same as the stretched beside it. In this case, there were 2 identical patches of spiderweb cracks, and 2 reproductions of the same Rembrandt. But the people inside the pizzeria were in no condition to examine walls by the time they woke up. The wall would have been repaired by the telekinetic division, and entire paranormal experience would have removed from their memories. A retrieval officer bolted from the restroom. "Commander." "Yes, Sergeant." "There's a human in here, sir." The concussor didn't reach him. "He's coming, sir, right now." "Sir." "Shields," barked Root. "Everyone." Holly tried. She really did, but it wouldn't come. Her magic was gone. A toddler waddled out of the bathroom, his eyes heavy with sleep. He pointed a pudgy finger directly at Holly. "Ciao, Futella," he said before climbing into his father's lap. He continued his snooze. Root shimmered back to a visible spectrum. He was, if possible, even angrier than before. "What happened to your shield, Short?" Holly swallowed. "Stress, Commander," she offered hopefully. Root wasn't having any of it. "You lied to me, Captain. You're not running hot at all, are you?" Holly shook her head mutely. "How long since you completed the root roll?" Holly chewed her lip. "I'd say about 4 years, sir." Root nearly popped a vein. 4 years? It's a wonder you lasted this long. "Do it now. Tonight. You're not coming below ground again without your powers. You're a danger to yourself and your fellow officers." "Yes, sir." "Get a set of hummingbirds from retrieval and zip across the old country. There's a full moon tonight." Yes, sir. And don't think I've forgotten about this shambles. We'll talk about it when you get back. Yes, sir. Very good, sir. Holly turned to go, but Root cleared his throat for attention. Oh, and Captain Short? Yes, sir. His face had lost its purple tinge. He almost seemed embarrassed. Well done on the life-saving thing. Could have been worse. An awful lot worse. Holly beamed behind her visor. Perhaps she wouldn't be kicked out of recon after all. Thank you, sir. Root grunted, his complexion returning to its normal ruddy hue. Now get out of here, and don't come back until you're full to the tips of your ears with magic. Holly sighed. So much for gratitude. Yes, sir. On my way, sir.